I met my husband when I was in college. We fell in love almost immediately and have been together ever since. He's my best friend, my confidant, and my partner in everything. We've been through a lot together, and I know that we can get through anything. But there's one person who has always been a thorn in our side, my mother in law. She's always been overbearing and controlling, but since we announced our engagement, she's taken it to a whole new level. It's like she thinks she's entitled to be involved in every aspect of our wedding planning, and when we don't agree with her, she tries to sabotage everything. My father in law, on the other hand, has always been kind and supportive. He's always been a calming influence on his wife and tries to reason with her when she gets out of hand. He's always been there for us, and we're grateful to him in our lives. But unfortunately, he doesn't seem to have much control over his wife's actions. It's been a real struggle dealing with my mother in law's behavior, but I'm determined not to let her ruin our special day. As we got closer to my wedding, I couldn't help but feel like something was off. I had this gut feeling that she was up to something more sinister than just trying to ruin my big day. I decided to keep an even closer eye on her, and that's when I caught her red handed. One day, I decided to pay my in laws a surprise visit. As soon as I entered the house, I heard strange noises coming from the upstairs bedroom. Curious, I slowly made my way up the stairs and down the hallway, trying to make as little noise as possible. The closer I got to the bedroom, the louder the noises became. My heart was racing with anticipation as I pushed the door open and saw my mother in law in bed with another man. I was completely stunned and couldn't believe what I was seeing. My mother in law had been cheating on my father in law this whole time, and I had just caught her in the act. She quickly tried to cover herself with the sheets and begged me not to tell anyone, but I was beyond angry and hurt. She said that it wasn't what it looked like and that I was misunderstanding the situation. But I knew exactly what was going on. I confronted her about it and she got defensive. She tried to make excuses and blame her husband for neglecting her needs, but when I refused to accept her lies and demanded an explanation, she became defensive and hostile. She accused me of being nosy and told me to mind my own business, and then, before I could even process what was happening, she kicked me out of the house, warning me that nobody would believe me even if I tried to tell the truth. I couldn't believe the audacity of this woman. Not only had she been trying to ruin my wedding, but she had also been cheating on her husband, and now she was threatening me. I knew I had to do something about it, but I didn't know where to start. It was a terrible feeling being tossed out like a common criminal, but I wouldn't let her scare me into silence. I knew that I had to find out more about this affair. I started to do some investigating and track down the guy who my mother in law was cheating with. It wasn't easy, but I managed to get some information from her social media profiles, and I eventually found him and managed to get his phone number. I called him up and confronted him about the affair. He was surprised to hear from me, but he didn't deny anything. In fact, he told me that he and my mother in law had been seeing each other for 8 months. I was shocked and disgusted. I couldn't believe that my mother in law would do something like this, especially for such a long time. I hung up the phone feeling angry and hurt, but at the same time, I felt like I had some sort of power now that I knew the truth. I knew that my mother in law had been lying to everybody, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I was disgusted by her behavior, but I didn't let it break me. Instead, I used her deceit as fuel to get revenge. I started planning how to expose her on the day of my wedding, and I was determined to make her pay for what she had done to her husband and our family. I reached out to him again, and he had no problem giving me more proof. It looks like this affair wasn't just platonic. I gathered more evidence through him, including pictures and messages. I wanted to have enough evidence to prove that my mother-in-law was cheating on my father-in-law and that she was trying to ruin my wedding. I also knew that my mother-in-law was still seeing him, so I decided to keep an eye on her and gather more evidence. I started to dig deeper and found out that my mother-in-law had been using her company credit card to pay for fancy dinners and hotel rooms for her lover. I managed to get hold of the receipts and statements showing the transactions, and I made sure to keep them safe. I was determined to expose my mother-in-law on my wedding day, and I wanted to make sure that everyone knew what she had done. I didn't want her to get away with it, and I knew that my father-in-law deserved to know the truth. So I spent the next few weeks gathering evidence and planning my revenge. I knew that it was risky, and I was afraid that my mother-in-law would find out what I was doing, but I was determined to see it through, no matter what. I knew that I had to be careful and keep everything a secret until the day of my wedding. Update 1, 2 months later. On the day of my wedding, I felt nervous and excited at the same time. I was nervous about what I was about to do, but I was also excited to finally expose my mother-in-law for what she had done. I knew it was going to be a memorable day, but she had no idea just how memorable it would be. As the wedding ceremony began, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction wash over me. I had gathered all the evidence I needed to expose my mother-in-law's affair, and I knew that she was going to pay for her actions. The ceremony went smoothly, and I was overjoyed to see my husband waiting for me at the altar with tears in his eyes. However, I knew that the real challenge was yet to come. As we moved to the reception, I noticed that my mother-in-law had tried to sabotage my seating arrangements, but I was prepared for her antics. I calmly explained to her that the seating arrangements were final and there would be no changes. She was clearly agitated, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She knew I was onto her. When it was time for the speeches, I stood up and took the floor. My heart was pounding in my chest. I knew what I was about to say would shock and upset a lot of people, but I also knew it was the right thing to do. I started by thanking everyone for coming to celebrate my wedding day with me and my husband. I then went on to talk about how much planning and effort had gone into making this day perfect. I talked about the beautiful flowers, the delicious cake, and the seating arrangements that were carefully planned to ensure everyone had a good time. That's when I dropped the bomb. I showed everyone the evidence I had collected on my mother-in-law's attempts to sabotage my wedding. I revealed how she had tried to switch my wedding cake with a cheap imitation, and how she had tried to ruin my flower arrangements with subpar flowers. But that wasn't all. I then revealed the most shocking news of all. My mother-in-law was cheating on her husband, my father-in-law. I showed everyone the text messages and photos that proved her infidelity, and the shocked gasps from the guests were audible. I continued by showing them all the receipts I had gathered and pictures of them kissing on fancy dates. My mother-in-law was livid. She tried to shout me down, saying that no one would believe me and that I was lying. She even threatened me, but I stood my ground. I knew I had to expose her for what she was, and I wasn't going to let her intimidate me. As I stood there in front of all the guests, I explained to them why I had been so ruthless with my mother-in-law. I told them about how I had caught her cheating on my father-in-law and how she had threatened me when I confronted her. I could see the shock on everyone's face, but I knew it was the right thing to do. My mother-in-law had tried to ruin my special day, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. They had seen the evidence I had collected, and there was no denying the truth. I could see my mother-in-law trying to defend herself, but it was too late. Everyone knew the truth. She had cheated on my father-in-law for 8 months, and she had tried to sabotage my wedding. And the worst part of it all is that she didn't even show any signs of regret. The aftermath of my speech was chaotic. My mother-in-law was taken out of the venue by security because she tried to attack me. She didn't even get near me, though. I received a lot of support and thanks from other guests who were grateful that I had uncovered the truth. In the end, my husband and I were still married, and I was relieved to be rid of my mother in law's toxic presence in my life. NTA, I can't believe OP's mother in law would do that to her. She did the right thing by exposing her. Her mother in law is a real piece of work. I can't believe she would try to sabotage her special day like that. YTA, I think what you did was petty and immature. Your mother in law may have made a mistake, but she didn't deserve to be treated like that. I think you took it too far. Your mother in law's cheating may have hurt you, but you didn't have to hurt her in front of all these people. OP did what she had to do. Her mother in law was cheating on her father in law for 8 months, and that is unacceptable. Her mother in law should be ashamed of herself for not only cheating, but also for trying to ruin her daughter in law's wedding. I cannot believe she would do something so selfish and cruel. OP did the right thing by exposing mother in law's affair and showing everyone what kind of person she really is. Her mother in law deserves all the criticism and shame she gets for her actions. I bet the people in the comments who are trying to justify her mother in law are just like her. The woman literally threatened OP, and you all are still being a-holes. Next story. I, female, 16, have 3 siblings, 2 younger sisters and 1 older brother, male, 17. We all live under the same roof with my parents, with our rooms fairly close together aside from my parents' room down the hall. My brother is usually really loud whenever he's playing games and has anger issues to the point he will scream and break things whenever something happens. Everyone has tried to do something about this, but nothing has worked, and we've all just given up at this point. A few nights ago, he had been screaming at his game and cursing loudly around 1 a.m., and my music wouldn't drown it out. So the next day, I brought it up to my parents, who said nothing can be done and that I should try and sleep earlier so I can't hear it around that time. I talked to him, and he said he doesn't mean to do it and he can't control it, so it isn't his fault either. Last night it was 12 a.m. and he was yelling so loud I had enough. I went into his room and prepared to yell right back at him that it was too late for this, before he slammed his PS4 controller through his monitor. I stood in shocked silence as he turned around and went red. His game crashed, and he turned and looked at me, screaming and crying that it was all my fault and that I had to give him my monitor now because I walked in the wrong time and it made him lose, and that's why he smashed it. My parents are mad at me for going against what they said, but they aren't interfering with the monitor issue as we need to sort it out ourselves. They say I'm in the wrong for trying to be the third parent and take control of the situation, and that I should have had more faith in them and stayed out of it. I feel like A. It's unreasonable for me to give him my monitor, as all I did was open his door. And even if that did make him lose his game, his anger issues aren't my fault. And B. I didn't know what else to do because nothing was changing. AITA? NTA. Your parents are the true a-holes here. Their stance of ignore it and it will go away is just plain shitty parenting. You weren't being a third parent by going to address your brother's behavior. You were being the only parent in that house. The fact that your brother actually believes that it isn't his fault that he's having what are essentially rage tantrums is proof of just how shitty your parents are. If he truly cannot control his outbursts, they need to get him help. Telling everyone to ignore the fact that this kid needs some sort of mental medical intervention is just plain child neglect on their part. If you have access to some sort of counseling program through school or even a community outreach group, I would suggest you take advantage. You definitely need to be able to talk to a reasonable adult who can help you navigate this until you get out of that house. I am sorry that your parents are so shitty and aren't doing their job, but you are in no way to blame for any of this. You don't owe your brother a monitor. But I would be careful about keeping your room locked since your parents don't believe in actual parenting. I'm sure if he breaks or steals your monitor, they won't do anything about it. They will most likely tell you to sort it out yourselves again. Seriously, though, your parents suck, and you can tell them a stranger on the internet said that. NTA, your brother needs to see a psychologist or therapist. Getting so angry at a game that you break things and throw tantrums at almost 18 years old isn't healthy. You didn't do anything. He's the one screaming at late hours of the night, keeping people up. He can game in the morning when he isn't disturbing people. It sounds like your parents are taking his side, brushing away his behavior because they don't want to deal with it anymore. Deal with it yourselves. It's no wonder you tried dealing with the noise yourself too if this is their reaction to things. First, they get mad at you for dealing with it yourself, and now they're putting their hands up and walking away because it's too messy for them. They need to decide if they're going to be parent figures or not because it seems like they're wishy-washy with their duties. Next story. I, 20, have an 8-month-old daughter. It's just me and her because her dad didn't want anything to do with her. Fine by me. Currently, I have zero interest in dating. My dad wasn't exactly an active participant in my upbringing. He met my stepmother when I was 10, and they've since had my two brothers, one being 2 months older than my daughter. I moved in with him because my mother couldn't handle a baby in the house. I'm currently doing my L3 apprenticeship in childcare. I work 35 hours a week. Not long, but one of the settings is an hour work and nearly an hour bus ride. I don't mean one or the other, so total nearly 2 hours. The other is an hour bus. I'm out usually 6:30 a.m. till 7 p.m. I pay rent, cook for everyone, and do chores. Pay my stepmother to babysit for me as she's a stay-at-home mom. However, in 2 months, my daughter will be able to start the nursery I work in. My stepmother's sister visited and I overheard. I don't know why. My dad referred to my daughter and his son as his and my stepmother's little babies. I waited till step-aunt left and reminded him that he didn't even want to be called granddad. He's not my baby's dad, nor is she mother. He said, sorry, with how often we look after them, sometimes it does feel like she's our daughter. He's been encouraging me to go university. I didn't get my math and doubt I'll get my functional math, so university is out of the question. But he mentioned how he'd be continuing to look after her. Shall I go to university? I said I wouldn't even bother trying to go to uni if there's going to be a cross boundary. I did cry. My stepmother said I was overreacting and that I should be happy. How close everyone is, how much they do for me, and sometimes people do form unconscious bonds and thoughts, and since they apologized, I shouldn't have manipulated them. AITA? NTA, speaking from the viewpoint of a mom, there is one thing to form a bond, which is good, but there's another way to refer to one's grandchild as one's child when it isn't, especially without your consent and knowledge. They're helping you out and you are paying your stepmom to care for your child until she can go to the daycare you work at. But that doesn't mean she can hog your daughter from you when you come home and want to hold your baby. She's TA for this and needs to stop right now. When your daughter can be at the daycare, try to find somewhere else to stay so this scenario is put to an end. They overstepped a boundary and then said you overreacted when you asked them to stop. That is not okay. You are NTA. You are kicking ass for having a baby at 20 and on top of that seem to have a fantastic plan to take off you too. I would also have a hard time hearing them call her their child, and I'm guessing you might even have a bit of guilt for not being with her all day. Women who have children and who want a career are screwed. and held to some weird standard about not being able to do both. Absolutely let them know that you aren't okay with them referring to your daughter, and be as respectful as you can. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.